Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the American College Center for Special Needs Planning webinar series. I'm Kelly Piacenti, and I'm head of the Special Care program for MassMutual Insurance Company. And I have my coworker and my friend, Jerry Hulick, here with me today. And we're going to speak about letters of intent in special needs planning. MassMutual's important disclosures that I do have to read to you. The information provided is not written or intended as specific tax or legal advice. MassMutual, its subsidiaries, employees, and representatives are not authorized to give tax or legal advice. Individuals are encouraged to seek advice from their own tax or legal counsel. Individuals involved in the estate planning process should work with an estate planning team, including their own personal, legal, or tax counsel. So today we're going to speak about person-centered planning, as well as the importance of integrated planning, comprehensive life care planning steps, the letter of intent examples, and the importance of communication and additional resources and support. So let's get started.
So Kelly, one of the first things we talked about, and you mentioned, is person-centered planning. And I think this has been around for some period of time when developing a life care plan that is inclusive of all aspects of lifestyle and what we envision priorities and concerns for the individuals involved. And anybody could be involved in this, a financial professional, but family members, caregivers. It could be other professionals like attorneys or accountants. If there are social workers involved or medical personnel, I mean, we still need to quantify, are there going to be medical needs and care needs going forward? So much is what is taking place is this person's the center of the planning around special needs, but it's not to be forgotten that ultimately it's a plan that has to include this person integrated with all the needs of the family as they're looking at various different things. I know, Kelly, you've had some thoughts about this in the past when you did some of your own planning. Kelly?
I did. Sorry about that, as I'm on mute. I think that, the plan is not as easy as everyone thinks, and it is something that you really have to go through a process to complete. Developing a life care plan really enables the person to obtain the best possible quality of life, but where is that coming from? So I think as a family, you really have to get involved in the planning process. This is not something that someone can typically sit down and do alone. If you're caring for somebody that's able to have input, absolutely include them in the process. And we're really talking about from where they are right now to where you foresee them in the future. So I think the process is a little more difficult than people envision. And I think that once you start down this path, it's something that you should be continually updating. Because I know with my own son, it was a little bit of a constant changing process. So it's definitely something that takes a lot of planning to complete.
And when we're talking about this planning, and we talked about individuals before, but financial professionals with the special needs training, this is a particular area. It's a specialized area of planning. And so we encourage, when you're looking at others that might be involved in the plan and creating a life care plan, to get the maximum that you can, you want to involve the professionals that really understand this area. The financial professionals with special needs training. You'll see later on, we discuss about some of the designations that are out there, some of the credentials that are out there for these individuals. There are two groups, and again, we'll discuss that a little bit more. There are attorney groups that specialize in special needs planning, accountants, bankers, professionals, social workers, advocates, medical professionals. What we're after is each plan, and for the family and for the individual with special needs or individuals with special needs, is very specific to them. Each plan is going to have its own uniqueness. It's going to be different. This isn't some boilerplate thing that you press a button and it spits out a plan. So everything you want to do with the planning has to deal with your priorities, your concerns, what keeps you up at night as far as a family, and then really trying to address the lifestyle issues for the best quality of life going forward. Anything to add there, Kelly?
You can see a pattern with all the individuals that we put here. These are really the individuals that know the person that you're caring for the best. So that's why we say include these individuals. You don't have to limit the list to what we've put out here. You can add others, I know people that will add neighbors or they'll add care workers, anyone that can make a difference in the person's life. You can certainly add them into this planning process. It's not limited to, this is really just a suggestion of some of the individuals you might want to consider including.
So next, we kind of look at the various different steps that we will go through as a part of this process, which are life care planning steps. And as you see, number one there is addressing the primary issues. And these are the issues for the family involved and the individual with special needs or individuals with special needs. What are the concerns and what are the priorities? What's the vision for the future? You know, are they going to have the capacity to have independent living? And is that something that the family would like to see happen? What are the educational goals as they develop and as they're growing out and aging out through the system? So you're looking at all the issues that are important primarily to this family, and because that is your plan. You're creating a life care plan vision of a view of what you see the future to be. We will be talking to people at all levels, younger children, all the way up to adult children with disabilities, and visioning out what you see for their lifestyle and their rest of life issues. We'll talk generally about some level of guardianship or alternatives to guardianship. And again, we're not making, and I know Kelly, you'll address this a little bit more here, but we're not saying that you need to necessarily do this. This is just one thing that's a consideration as the children age out and become their own person at the age of majority or age 18 in most states. We're also identifying all the financial resources that exist. And that includes, you know, the assets and accounts that might be already established for the family. It'll include employer benefits that have, you know, benefits that ultimately could accrue to family members if something were to happen to one or both of the parents. It'll talk about government benefits and the various different entitlement as well as public assistance programs that are out there. We want to make sure that when we identify what the needs are going to be and looking at any gaps that might be there as we prepare the life care plan costs, we have to then compare the resources that exist to meet those gaps or to meet those needs going forward to see if there are any gaps. So it's a process that every decision we make as a family has a process with a financial backdrop to it. There may be a cost. They may be getting certain therapies through the education systems as a part of their IEP, or they may want to do additional things outside of the system that they're going to pay for privately on a private pay basis. So all of this needs to be considered and the cost of those things going forward as we vision out what it may look like in the future. Kelly, anything to add there?
No, I think that's good on that one, Jeff.
Kelly, go ahead.
Well, I mean, some of the things that you also would take into consideration is preparing the letter of intent, which we're going to speak about today and what it really is. It's not legally binding, but it has been used in a court of law, and we'll get into it a little more about some of the things you can include in the letter of intent. Prepared legal instruments, you know, that's essential to these plans. It's really encouraging the family to have that conversation. These life care planning steps are purely a guide, but it also gets the family to begin the conversation that is very difficult to have. Review the need for a special needs trust. Yes, you will hear me say that not everyone needs a special needs trust, but many of the individuals that we work with do need a special needs trust because they will need support and care the rest of their life. If you're dealing with somebody that maybe just needs a little assistance, is going to be able to hold a full-time job that pays reasonably well, they may not need a special needs trust. Once again, some of these things are, you know, they have to be discussed with the family. It's not a cookie cutter approach. Not every family is the same. An ABLE account is something that many of our families are taking advantage of. You don't need to just have an ABLE account. You could have a special needs trust with an ABLE account or just have an ABLE account. But the Achieving Better Life Expectancy account is what I call it, really, you know, does help our population have that independence. And that's really what it was there for. So the ABLE accounts are very, very good and helpful for our community and something that all families should consider. Hold a family meeting. You can also invite friends to it. I have many people within this community that maybe don't have any other family members that could take this on or could help with future planning, but they do have close friends that they want to invite, and they absolutely can. The other thing that we're always encouraging our families to do is review the life care plan annually. Things change. I mean, look what's happened in the last year with COVID. Many things have changed. Many people that were initially maybe involved in the life care planning steps of an individual are no longer there. Maybe they've moved on, or maybe they can't do it anymore. So we would say review it annually and make the necessary changes.
I think, as you say here, I mean, we're going to get into the letter of intent more specifically now, but all of these things are things that need to be communicated and discussed if we're ultimately going to get the best result around a plan that meets the needs and the lifestyle desires that you see for the future. And so, you know, if you skip any one of these, then you're not taking advantage of the full array of things that are available. And so these steps are kind of important. And for families, and Kelly, you can address this too, for families, it's an overwhelming process many times because there's just so many places and things that they need to look to, and it's not found in all one place. And so the planners that are helping families through this are going to be critically important to walking them through the steps so it isn't so overwhelming, and then they can really capture the kinds of things that are most important to them. So Kelly, why don't you get into the beginning of the letter of intent?
Sure. I mean, the letter of intent is really, many families use a letter of intent as maybe a scrapbook of the history of their child's life. Well, it's an extremely important document. The child's medical condition and medication is usually put into a letter of intent. Letter of intent for me, I always say it's a letter to the babysitter on steroids, because it can take you through all the different unique things that maybe you do with that individual. When my son, who passed away last year, was alive, I mean, I had a letter of intent from when he was born. And the letter of intent really captured so many things that my family wanted for him. My son, Nicholas, unfortunately, was not able to speak, but there were many things, if we weren't around, that we wanted done for him. So we were able to capture, you know, some of our hopes and dreams for him, hoping that's what he wanted as well. And really to ensure that whoever picked up after us would have a guide. I always say it's like a little book that you can open that tells you about the life of the individual. If you update it regularly and store it in a place that others know where it is, it could really become quite useful. One of the things that I talk to a lot of families about is that it's not legally binding, but I have seen that this has been used in a court of law as the family's wishes. With my son, there were many things that were unique to him. I have a husband, we live in the same house, but there are many things that I did with my son that he never knew about. So my son was not verbal, but he certainly, you know, didn't like certain things. He didn't like chocolate. Is that amazing that I could produce a child that didn't like chocolate? Yes, but that wasn't his thing. Brushing his teeth with warm water versus cold water, all the things he couldn't tell people, all the therapies that he had done, or therapies that were successful, therapies that were not successful. The letter of intent can really be used for anything that's specific to the individual you're caring for. If the individual you're caring for can also help write that letter of intent, we encourage that as well. You could talk about religion, you can talk about marriage, you could talk about anything that's important to the one you're caring for and is important to your family. And that's really what families should utilize it for. At MassMutual, we have a form, and we certainly, you know, are happy to share that with any family. You can do it electronically. Mine was in a notebook. It started about this big, and it was about this big at the end. So, I mean, you can update it on a regular basis. Some families don't need to update it until maybe every year. With me, it was constantly, because medications were changing, treatments were changing, caregivers were changing. I wanted it all documented, because if anything ever happened to me, I wanted somebody to be able to go take a look at this letter of intent that I had written and say, these are the things he liked. These are the things that absolutely did not work with him, so that they wouldn't have to repeat all the mistakes that I made and maybe learn some really important things about my son. Joe, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that when you made a couple of really critical points here, and that there are things that you were doing on a regular basis that not everybody in your entire family, including your husband, might have been aware of. And I think that's very typical of families, that many times they're going to divide and conquer because there's so many things that need to be dealt with, so many forms, so many submissions, so many various different programs. And so many families will divide and conquer or help with, caregiving. Siblings many times will be involved in caregiving and know the nuances about the situation. So to the extent that we capture all of these kinds of things, and I've heard stories too, like, if a child begins to act out, if you put him into a warm shower, he would calm right down. Some of the things that you've mentioned, you've even used the example, Kelly, and I'll have you repeat that about because I think it's an important factor. I mean, about the Yankees.
Well, I mean, there are many things that you can use a letter of intent for. When my son was young, one of the things that I always made known, and many of the advisors I've trained over the years and that work in my program, they all know this story, and they're probably rolling their eyes right now. But I originally was from Boston, and my heart is in Boston. So when it came to my son, I figured, if he could speak, he would feel the same way I did. And one of the things in my letter of intent is, don't ever take my son to a Yankee game. That's just because I think he would feel that way. And that was something that was important to me. So it was certainly in his letter of intent. But all kidding aside, I mean, as an advisor or somebody that's working with a special needs family, I often hear, well, Kelly, I couldn't help them. They didn't have any assets. First of all, it's a fallacy that we're all poor, because that is not true. Look at the rates of autism. Look at the people that have children that are being diagnosed on the spectrum. That is absolutely not true. But what I say to any advisor that comes to me with a question is that you should never turn someone away and not be able to help them at all. A letter of intent does not cost anything. It's simply giving them the instructions on how to do it, and does give a family a way to plan. Is it the best thing to do in lieu of a will or a trust or legal documents? Absolutely not. But if you're dealing with a family that hasn't done anything else, I certainly would encourage them to do a letter of intent, because God forbid something happens and one of those family members, or if it is a single parent, doesn't come home at night. What do? Like, what route do you follow to help this person that now maybe, like my son, is not able to communicate or can't tell you what they like, or that they don't want to live with that sister, or they do want to live with their sister, or that the dad that was never involved in the life, or the mom, they don't want to live with them. Those are some of the things you can put in a letter of intent. It's not in lieu of your legal documents, but it certainly can help. So it's something that I feel is one of the most important tools that we work with as advisors.
And I asked you to bring up that anecdote about the Yankees, because again, when we're looking at letter of intent, this is what makes this not just a plan that's boilerplate, but this is the kinds of things that make it personal, that make it for the lifestyle of the individual involved. I had a situation where they put in there that the child had to go, it was an adult child, but he had to go to a sporting event at least once a week, because if he didn't, he kind of funked out. And yet that was important enough that they wanted that in the letter of intent. And this particular family went so far as to even put it into the trust to say that instruction was in there formally and legally. So when you're really looking to protect the lifestyle issues that are most important, the letter of intent is critical in that process. And that's part of the why and the how of doing it. You're leaving explicit and specific instructions that familiarize anybody that's going to be a successor to the process as to what is important, what's not important, the things to be aware of. It's a working document. As Kelly said, it started out smaller and it grew into a very large document because it needs to be updated as the individual or individuals continue to develop. Their situation may change, their interests may change. So we're suggesting, just like you might do a medical checkup, that you would do a financial checkup or a letter of intent checkup on an annual basis, where you're looking at what the needs are and how they might have changed. As Kelly mentioned too, there are lots of templates out there. MassMutual has a letter of intent that's fillable, but there are templates that are out there online that have been done by attorney groups, that have been done by various ones. So there's plenty of opportunities to look at all the various things that are captured in these kinds of documents. And again, they're not legal documents, but they have been referred to in situations where everything else is silent. And the more input we get from everyone, whether it be siblings, whether it be family, whether it be people that they're engaged with, church or religious involvement, whatever it is, all of these things are adding to the specific personality of what this document becomes in the process of caring. So anything to add there, Kelly?
Yeah, just a couple things. I mean, we saw over the last 2 years with COVID, tons of people that were using the letter of intent that never thought they would have to. We saw young people getting sick. We saw parents of many of the people that we care for getting sick or getting COVID or even passing away from it. So suddenly the letter of intent was one of the only things that they had in place. We also had, a huge surge in the need to plan because people suddenly realized that if something happens, there's nobody else to step in here and I need to do some planning. But the letter of intent was used on a pretty regular basis. And I spoke with quite a few families that actually came back to me and said, Kelly, you know what? I didn't do the planning. I didn't get to the lawyer. I didn't do the things that I was supposed to do, but I did write the letter of intent. I was sick and my daughter actually went and utilized the letter of intent. And I just want to tell you how important it was to our family. So as an advisor, once again, if you do nothing else, at least tell the family you're working about a letter of intent. We do give you, the template, you could use it, but you could put it in a notebook. It's really, these are the wishes, these are the hopes, these are the dreams, these are the things we want. I absolutely do not want him in a group home, or I absolutely want him in a group home. Whatever it is, you can put into this letter of intent. And I would definitely encourage you to think about, educating a family that you're working with about the letter of intent. And as an advisor, when it comes to your practice or your specialty, it's also giving you a lot of information. A lot of advisors will do the initial intake and not even really know how to ask about a disability or what does that disability mean? I often get a call like, Kelly, I have an individual that has cerebral palsy. What do you think that means? What do you think they'll need in the future? Well, let's think about that. My son had cerebral palsy and was only able to smile. I have a friend that works amongst us that does the same job as I do and is fine that has cerebral palsy. So there's different varying, different levels of every disability. So you need to keep that in mind. So when you're working with families and you get a letter of intent, you get a copy of it, you suddenly start seeing that they need therapy 3 times a week, that they need an occupational therapist involved. They need a speech therapist involved. They need to go to a behaviorist. You start seeing through the letter of intent some of these things that maybe they didn't put into the initial intake form. So it's also a tool for any advisor to look through and maybe uncover some additional things that you missed or additional things that maybe the family forgot to provide you with, that they want them to live in the family house the rest of their life. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that that house shouldn't be underwater and that it certainly can be put into a trust. But where is the house? Is it in Boston that you need upkeep for a snow removal and you need somebody to shovel? Or is it in California and what do you need there? So those are some of the things that could come out in the letter of intent. And as an advisor, I often encourage you to take a look through it if the family is willing to share it with you, as well as their attorney or anybody else that's involved in their planning.
So when we look at the various things that are out there, some of the examples, Kelly, you've given several of the examples. And one thing I'd like to bring up before I turn it back to you too is that families are always going to where resources are. I mean, these are families that are engaged and really trying to understand the best things to do for their child or children. And so they might be going to different workshops, they might be going to different symposiums or even national meetings of various different nonprofits and that kind of thing. And so as an example, you might have a child that's, 5 years old. Well, clearly they're not going to be as concerned about the concept of guardianship, or they're not going to be concerned about whether or not they may or may not qualify for any government public assistance benefits, because generally they don't come into play till later on. But there may be notes in the letter of intent for somebody in the future to see, to make sure that something isn't missed later on, because we're looking at a life continuum. We're looking at a lot of things that may take place. So the letter of intent in some respects can be a letter of instruction. Don't forget about checking on this or that, not only about just what medications they may be on or different things, but different things that may be happening in the future. When we talk about an IEP, the process of an IEP is an every year thing. There may be some instructions around what the IEP is going to look like and how you need to see the continued development of the individual. The educational process is out there. There's not a school system that doesn't have some constraints about all the possibilities that might exist. And yet, the IEP process and services that are supposed to be rendered are pretty wide open, but it's going to depend very much on the local school system and the amount of dollars that they have in the budget to do these kinds of things. So the letter of intent from a parent or parents can give successors a much better feel for what needs to be considered going forward now and in the future. I have so many workshops, and Kelly, I'm sure you've seen this as well, where I'll be talking about SSI and the eligibility. The parent's income is included in the process of looking at eligibility prior to age 18, but after age 18, it's the child and the child's situation. A lot of people don't understand that that's a critical date, or they don't understand some of the entitlement benefits that we've been paying for under Social Security. So I've dealt with many families where we'll educate them on many of these things, but it goes into their letter of intent, so it's not forgotten 10 years from now or what have you. It's interesting, as my career has continued out there, people will say, well, I just hope you're around when this comes into play. Well, I can guarantee you, people that I'm planning that have infant children today, I'm not going to be around. So they're going to have to capture this in their letter of intent and other places so that that's not missed in the process. So Kelly, any further examples here?
I would give a couple things. First of all, when we think about the letter of intent, what people don't realize is that it does open up some of those gaps. We've had people come back to me and say, I was sitting down, I was doing the letter of intent, and I included his older siblings in the process. And what I found out is that they really don't want to be involved the way that I want them involved in the future. So that's a tough conversation for our families, but I think the letter of intent can bring out some of those issues. Maybe also discuss some of, the path that the person has been down. With my son, I had him on the ketogenic diet for many years. People would not know that unless I documented that somewhere. So don't try it with him in the future, because it really didn't work for us, or it was extremely successful, but there's a limitation on how long you can do it. There are things like that. But I think that the letter of intent can fill in a lot of the gaps. One of the things that I learned with the letter of intent is that when we ask, what does your child like to do for fun? We don't think a lot of it. We don't think it's a big deal, but that's a huge component in the life of a person with a disability. That's, their life. That's, maybe you like to go shopping. I know I certainly do. And if somebody was to take that away from me, there'd be a problem. So I think with some of the people we're caring for, what they like to do is really important. Jerry talked about someone going to a sporting event every month or every week, but we have people that like to go out to eat once a week. And it's really, part of their routine, part of their structure. But as advisors and people that are trying to help the family, what does that mean? Well, that means that money has to be available for the person to go every week. And if it's not coming from their government benefits, where does it come from? How do they get to this event? Who takes them? Who's involved in it? And those are some of the things that you can put in the letter of intent. He wants to go out with his sister every Friday for dinner. And if she's not available, then he'll take his brother. So, things like that. It may not seem important to us as someone that's reading it, but I can tell you as a special needs mom, these things are really important to the family members so that they can understand. Because unfortunately, my son passed away, but everyone in my home was more than familiar with the letter of intent, because me, just being the person I am, would sit them down and say, hey, listen, let's talk about this letter of intent at least once a year or every other year, because I was always traveling and I never wanted there to be a gap in his care, or I didn't want them to have to redo all the things that I did from the day he was born. So, the letter of intent can also encourage that conversation and maybe drag out some of those things that the family doesn't like to talk about. That as a sibling, I love being part of his life, but I certainly don't want him living in my house. Those are the conversations that come out, and those are the conversations that need to happen before a parent passes away and suddenly everybody's dealing with something that they don't want to be dealing with. So I think the letter of intent is a great way to get that conversation going.
So again, keeping in mind, I think that I think we've talked about all the various things, and the more input that comes to this letter of intent from various different people, the better the document is going to be. But it's probably one of the most important things as a communication device. As Kelly says, as you're talking to other family members, you're talking to other individuals as to what might go in there, it's a communications device. And one of the biggest issues that we deal with, sometimes families are so embroiled in day-to-day, that they never talk about what the day-to-day process is and everything that's involved. They're too engaged in the process. And so, you know, to sit down as a family and talk about this, it's a huge communication tool, and even to extended family. When it comes to certain benefit structures, if there's assets in the name of the individual, then that could cause us a problem later on. So the more we communicate the planning that's being done, the more complete that process will be. And this can be addressed to anyone. It can be addressed to future caregivers. It could be addressed to people that might be trustees to trusts going forward, or other documents. It could be part of the family process. Again, it's to be addressed in generic enough that you're really trying to capture all the things that are most important. And for the future, I mean, we constantly hear, and Kelly says, someone passes, and now all of a sudden, that is not the time to try to be figuring out what's to take place, because we're already under stresses of what's taking place because of the loss. So to the extent that it's a guide, it's a reference, it's where they go to certain things, and this kind of family guide really needs to be done for everybody in the family, particularly the parents as well. That's a part of the process when we're doing a complete plan, where there's going to be certain people that are not going to necessarily be able to fend for themselves, but will be dependent upon others. The more we give instructions around how that is to take place, how the gaps of what the needs were have been filled and what's there. It's one thing to say you're going to be taking care of my child as a successor. It could be a sibling, could be other family members. It's another thing to say, oh, you're going to be taking care of my child as a successor. And by the way, you have to have the assets to be able to do it. Very different story. So the planning that's done around the financial aspects are critically important to also let people know. So Kelly, anything more to add?
No, I mean, I'm getting some questions in the chat about, can we share our template? I did put my email in there. We're happy to share the template, but keep in mind, as an advisor, try to get a copy of it as well. I think that's one of the things to keep in mind. It's a guide for the family, but I also think it's a guide for our advisors, and I think they're extremely helpful. So I think that's good on that slide, Chair.
So again, this really speaks to the issue that every person has different needs. Everyone has different wishes for the loved one, and the letter of intent helps the caregivers and everybody that may be involved ultimately in what's going to take place, deliver the best possible lifestyle and care going forward. This is about really lifestyle, about a quality of life that we're looking to establish and how that might be impacted. So Kelly, talk about the importance of the family meeting.
So a family meeting, I mean, we've mentioned it along the way. I gave you some examples of why a family meeting is important, but you know, it's to talk about those future needs. I think that everybody wants to help you when you're caring for somebody with a disability. And it's great that you have family members that say, I'm going to step in, I can do this. Sometimes it's our parents and they're elderly when something happens, and really they're not going to be able to do it. So it's really trying to be realistic about the future care provider. If you're looking at somebody that's older than you to step in, that may be good if something happens right away, but in the future, that's just not going to work. It's also, you know, other siblings. You really need to have that conversation with them, because siblings are not stepping up in a way that you're expecting them to. It's not that they're going to step away, but they don't want to do the day-to-day. I mean, my example is something that I've always used, that, my son was one of four. I have two older children that would definitely wanted to jump in and help, but the type of care that my son had, I really didn't want them to take that on. It was 24/7, and you needed somebody here with you to care for him. And I didn't want them going into their lives, bringing in their brother and telling their spouse, I got to take care of my brother full time. I got to work full time. I didn't want that lifestyle for them. I love that they wanted to take care of him. But being realistic in a family meeting, I said to them, that's not really what we want for you guys. We didn't want them to take my son because I felt that that would really take over their life. And that's not what I wanted for them. I wanted my son to have a different lifestyle, that he had some independence, whatever that could look like for us. So it was important in a family meeting that that came out. Another thing that came out was when it came to caring for my son, I have a sister that would be, and you hear that little Boston accent there, that would be fantastic in taking care of my son and doing the day-to-day. But when it came to the financial side of it, that wasn't going to happen because she liked to shop as much as I did. So that also came out in a family meeting, that I would love her to care for him, but financially, I needed somebody else to take care of the finances because I really needed them to last his entire life. So some of those concerns can come out. It can come out about how much care the person needs. I think when people say, I'll take it on, I can help you, they don't realize that we take them to therapists 5 days a week, that we got to fight with the school and the busing and the nursing 7 days a week, that the doctor's appointments are in another state and it takes 2 days to get him back and forth to doctors because he can't make the trip back at night, so we've got to sleep over. There were many things that came out in that family meeting. So when we talk to families about doing a letter of intent, the family meeting has to occur, because having all these great ideas and all these thoughts about what I want for someone can't stay up here, because if it's up here, then nobody else knows what it is. So a family meeting is going to say, these are the things that are in the letter of intent. What do you think of them? What don't you understand? It came down to, us showing therapies. You could go into a website and see the therapies that we did with him, that if a therapist didn't show up, these are the therapies that he needed done. And we would train our kids and anyone that was involved in his life how to do those therapies, because sometimes we'd have nursing not show up or a care provider. You can do anything you want with the letter of intent. You can include as much information or as little information as you want. But I encourage my families to include more, because if anything, I could flip back 3 years ago and see some of the things that were great and maybe figure out why they didn't work today. So that family meeting is very important. It opens up the line of communication and gets everybody to start talking about how they feel. It's also the person with a disability. Start speaking to them about where they want to live in the future. Maybe they want to live with a sibling, or maybe they want their own apartment. Maybe they want to move into an apartment before a parent dies, so that the parent can come visit them or see that transition before something happens. One of the biggest problems in our community is that nobody really likes change. So when a parent passes away and we immediately move that person to a group home or another housing, it's a problem. Why don't we as caregivers and parents start doing the process while we're alive, so that we can go visit them in their new house and see how they're doing? Or if it isn't a right fit, find a place that is a right fit. Those are the things that can come out in a family meeting. So Jared, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
The only thing I would add is that as financial practitioners, I think you need to be aware of the fact that this is not sometimes as natural as you would think. A lot of times I've had to facilitate this kind of a discussion with the family because the family couldn't find a way to get it out, couldn't find a way to get it done. I literally had one case of a clinical psychologist who said, I don't even know how to start the conversation with my family. So can I bring them all to your conference room, and can we sit down and you could start to walk through everything to help facilitate the conversation? So many times to get this, it's that important. Sometimes we as financial practitioners, because we're dealing with so many of the financial issues, and sometimes parents don't even want to discuss that with their kids. we have to help facilitate this kind of a meeting going forward. So just know that and be aware of that. And I think here's a very important piece. This is really a holistic planning process. We're capturing the plans, we're developing what we see that are important for the family. We're capturing and integrating the legal structure, if there's going to be a legal structure involved, how everything integrates back to government benefits, maybe employer benefits, what they've done and accomplished on a personal basis, taking all these desires and concerns, and we're bringing it all together. This is what helps families kind of check off and reduce the anxiety of things that they're concerned about, because they now feel, at least I'm organized. We can't predict the future. If we could, our lives would be a lot easier. But from this standpoint, we have to integrate everything together. It's not one component is separate and distinct. They're all integrated, and we got to make sure they work together nicely. Kelly, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, two things. I just got a note in the chat from Elizabeth Brady. And one of the things that she said, and it says, the letter of intent is the ultimate gift to the child and his or her family and caregiver. And I really feel that way. I feel like it's really something that could help all your family members. But when we talk about holistic planning, one of the things that I always talk to my advisors about is that this type of planning is different. This type of advisor is different. We're different to these families because once you take care of somebody, a person with special needs for them, they look at you very differently. This isn't a once and done transaction with these families. You now really become the trusted advisor. If you could take care of my son, Nicholas, then you can take care of my whole family. But I don't think that many advisors can really, they don't figure that out, that these families are different. What you've done is you've taken that little brick off my shoulder. You've actually helped me with something that has kept me up at night every night of my life. So this is a different type of planning. It is holistic. It's not just about one child, it's about the family unit and how you can help that family unit. So when we talk about special needs planning, our advisors are unique. It's not a once and done. The ones that work at MassMutual, I can tell you that it's higher products per household, a higher retention rate with their customers. And why is that? It's because we're taking care of something that is so precious to them and something that really, really keeps them up at night. So it is about holistic planning, and it's capturing information that you wouldn't normally capture.
So Kelly, you talk about the importance of specialization in this area and how it's a unique area from a planning standpoint. And I know how dedicated you are to educating your planners. So speak to us a little bit about some of the designations and credentialing that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, the American College, which, obviously you're all here today, has the Chartered Special Needs Consultant designation. And it's for financial professionals that are working within the special needs arena and working with our families. There are 3 courses that you need to take. And I know our friend Tom Brinker is on the line as well today, and they're fantastic courses. What I say to families is that somebody with a Chartered Special Needs Consultant designation is someone that's taken those extra steps. They actually care enough to become educated in this arena. I've had people call me and say, I don't need the education, I don't need the designation. I've worked with special needs families before, I'm an attorney. And honestly, I mean, I went out and got the designation myself, and I had done this for many years, as well as I'm a parent. So, I mean, I think it's important that we educate advisors or family members that really are in this or working in this area. It talks to us about people first language. It talks about special needs trust. It talks about the planning for our families. And I think it really, goes back to, are you really dedicated to this? Or is this just another designation you want to put on your card? For me, it's somebody that has taken those extra steps and really wants to work with our community and wants to work with our families. So, Joe, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've captured it. It's a specialty area. Again, working with attorneys, there's 2 attorney groups, the Special Needs Alliance and the Academy of Special Needs Planners. It's a specialized area. So if you're going to be in this area, you want the credentials. The credential is really beginning to catch on amongst this community, and they understand it. And so if you're going to dedicate yourself to adding this to your practice, then it's something you seriously should consider to get the appropriate credentials in the process. So other resources that you might find to help these planners, Kelly?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that, most of my planners are aware of is that you do need local resources, local nonprofits, so that when you're working with a family and they say, hey, I need a sibling support group, or I need some help because I just don't have enough help coming in my house, having a list of local nonprofits that could help the family is also going to ensure your success within this community. We at MassMutual have newsletters and publications that we produce that our planners can send out to their families that are talking to them and speaking to them about things that are happening on the Hill, things that are impacting our community that families need to know about so that they can plan for the future. We have many families that rely solely upon government benefits. Well, what do government benefits look like today? What are they going to look like in 5 years? So that's also something that we make available for our families so that they can have that information. Support groups are always great for even, parents. There are aging caregiver support groups. There's all kinds of support groups out there for our families and the family members. Government agencies. Every day I speak to a family that didn't apply for government benefits or don't think they're eligible for government benefits. What I always tell the families that I work with is after the age of 18, everything changes. So if you've done the right thing and you've kept that person, away from $2,000, not having anything in their name over $2,000, and they are truly somebody that has a disability with a diagnosis and sometimes without, there are plenty of benefits and things out there that they are eligible for. The government may say no to you today, but if you call back and speak to somebody different in 6 months, that could change. So, your situation could also change as well. So I constantly work with our families to get them back to the government agencies and make sure that they're calling. Many of our advisors even support our families by helping them with the call or even attending the meeting with them. But it's really getting the information to our families. That's what this is about. So how can MassMutual help? We have local organizations and advocacy groups that we have available to us. Protecting the future for eligibility for government benefits. We train our advisors how to do that. Hopefully everyone on this call today knows how to do that, but we really want our families to have the best of both worlds. They can have all the government programs that are out there and they're eligible for, and they have the ability to put money into a special needs trust or an able account for all the other things in that person's life. Create a life care plan. We think it's really important and something that really helps our families out. Understanding the financial and legal issues in special needs planning, including a special needs trust and the different types of trusts that are out there, and really determining how much money is needed to provide for lifetime quality care for the individual, keeping in mind it's not a cookie cutter approach. Every family, every person is different. Every amount is going to be different.
So I think when you look at it, we mentioned the 2 attorney groups before as far as the planning process goes, and then the financial professionals and the credentialing that goes with that. Somebody that's serious about this and wants to make this a part of their practice, just understand that it's not something you dip your toe into. You can, if you don't even have the right language, as Kelly said, the person-centered language and the nomenclature, you can easily not fool. This is not a community that you can fool, that you know about without some understanding, true understanding of what it means. And so they're going to be suspect. They've been, this community has been taken advantage of. They've been led down the wrong path. They're battling all the time for their children and what's to take place, whether it be health insurance programs or various different government programs. So they look for people that they can trust, that really understand, they can be of help, that they can integrate into what they're thinking as far as their planning. So Kelly, I'll turn it over to you for any final comments. And then if you want to open to questions, I think we're in pretty good shape time-wise. And any final thoughts?
Yeah, of course, I always have another comment, right, Jar? Well, first of all, Jar, thank you so much for doing this presentation with me today. But to everybody out there, it's just really important to our families that they're guided in the right direction. I am extremely passionate about every family that we work with. And I think that if you're not telling them about the letter of intent, then you're not really doing what you need to do, because you can plan with them, but if they don't have any of the documents in place, then it's a huge issue. So, I mean, one of the things that the American College has, and one of the reasons we're here today, is that they do have the designation program. And if you don't have the designation, I would seriously encourage you to visit their new website and take a look at what's out there, because it is a fantastic program. And if you have any questions, Jerry and I would be happy to answer those questions for you. I did get a note about maybe having a different type of letter of intent for different disabilities. And that certainly is something that the families can tweak or change. It's really up to the individuals. I do have friends that have individuals that are bipolar, and the whole letter of intent is speaking about what happens when they're on their medication versus what happens when they're not. So it's a template. Like I said, it's something that they can tweak and they can change to whatever fits their need. But it is something that hopefully families can get accomplished and get done before something happens. So try to encourage any family that you're working with to think about completing a letter of intent. Joe, did you have any final comments? Or I don't see any other questions, but I did put our website out there and my email, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions that come to us as well. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming today and joining us for our webinar. Take a look at the American College's website, and if you need us, please feel free to reach out. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.